Okay, so we can start. Thank you everybody for being here. And today we are talking about Autowiring in Drupal. And basically we want to use it everywhere. I'm Luca, I'm from Italy. I'm a Drupal developer since many years. I work for an Italian agency called Fabric, and I contribute some modules to the community if you want to check out. And if you want to contact me, I am lussoluca everywhere. So that's it. Okay, just a couple of words about Fabric. We are a tech company. We develop, design, and engineer custom application, and we use cloud to deploy everything for our customer. So we are partners with the major cloud providers, and we are very active in the open source community. So we are a member of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, Open Source Security Foundation, the Linux Foundation Europe, and many others. Okay, but let's start with the topic of this presentation. So we start talking about services. Services in Drupal, or in a Symfony application if you want. Services are highly specific, reusable, and stateless objects that should perform a single and well-defined task or provide a particular functionality. For example, in the core of Drupal, we have services to give access to the configuration, for example, to give access to the entity, so to load, store, or manage entities, config and content entities, manage forms, validate emails, access to database, and so on. In the core alone, there are more than 300 services that performs those tasks. All services are managed by a service container. That is a big repository of services that is used to collect, instantiate, and manage all the services defined in a Drupal website. This repository is called a service container, or inversion of control container, and is responsible for instantiating services, dependency resolution, and the configuration and lifecycle management of your services. We use services, and we use a service container that collects all the services to promote loose coupling, to avoid services highly coupled between themselves, because usually a service doesn't need to know, a class that uses a service doesn't need to know how to create a service, where the service is, where the service is implemented, in which class is implemented, which dependencies he has, and so on. You usually only request a service from the service container, and the container handles all the complexities of finding the service, the correct implementation, create a new instance, inject all the dependency, and so on. And this is useful because it makes it easy to swap out one implementation with another. So, for example, if you have a service that sends emails with a specific provider, in your code you don't need to know which provider your customer will use at some point. Just ask for a service that is able to send emails, and then the service container knows which specific implementation to use in that case. This is done to fulfill a pattern, a principle in every software architecture that is called SOLID. That is an acronym for different specific principles. The service container in Drupal is used to fulfill three of the letters from this SOLID approach, The S stands for single responsibility principle. So a service should do one and only one task. So if you have a service to send email, that service should not log, for example, if something goes wrong, or create the templates for the email and so on. It only responsible must be sending an email to an address. The E stands from interface segregation principle. This is a principle that says that a service interface, the interface that describe the service to the other part of the system, should have a limited numbers of methods. So if I implement an interface, I should not have to implement tens of methods, but just the one that are needed for fulfill that service task. And the latest, the D stands from dependency inversion principle. That is something we talked in the previous slide. So a service must not depend on concrete implementation, but only on interfaces. So in your code, you should use only interface to represent the services, and then it's the responsibility of the service container to found the concrete implementation and inject in your code. Okay, in the rest of the presentation there are some examples of advanced use of Drupal service container. If you want to check it out, I took those examples from the core of Drupal 11 and a couple of modules I maintain that are Web Profiler and Symfony Messenger. The code is not exactly the same. I simplify it for the presentation to explain the topics. Okay, so let's start with services dependencies. As we said, the service container, one of the service container responsibility is to load services and manage dependency resolution. For example, if I have this service that is called, it's big enough, you can read. Okay, I don't know how to make it bigger. Maybe
That's what she said.
The screen is not so. So for example, the first service that is Web Profiler Matcher Exclude Path, it's implemented in a specific class that is Web Profiler Request Matcher, and it takes three arguments that are Patch Matcher, Path Matcher, Config Factory, and Exclude Path. Those services are defined in the core services YAML of Drupal core. Path Matcher, for example, again is defined in a specific class and takes two arguments, config factory again, and current route match, and so on. So when I ask Drupal and the service container of Drupal for an instance of the Web Profiler Matcher Exclude Path service, he has to go through all the arguments, build their class, and then inject the results in the constructor of my service. So in the constructor of Web Profiler Request Matcher service, I can retrieve all the concrete implementation for Path Matcher interface and Config Factory interface, for example. Because the service container knows with the YAML definition where to find the required arguments, in which classes they are implemented, and how to inject them in the constructor. Okay. Service container in Drupal, the service container of Drupal has a lot of features. We will talk just about the yellow one in this presentation, but if you look at the code, for example, of Web Profiler or Symfony Messenger and the Drupal core, there are a lot of other interesting features that you can leverage on in your custom modules, for example. The task we want to complete with this presentation is go from a standard service definition that maybe you have seen in a lot of custom on contrib modules, where we define an ID for the service, for example, webprofiler.profilerListener, the class where the service is, a list of arguments the service depends on, and maybe a list of tags that are used to categorize those services. Basically, leveraging the features of the latest Drupal service container, we want to go from writing this in our services YAML to just this. So we can get rid of the ID, the arguments, the tags, and so on. So we just see how to do that, basically. Okay. Some names. Okay, first step, we want to remove the definition of the tags. We don't want to say that this service is tagged by the event subscriber tags. We want the service container discover it automatically for us. So we have to type less in the service YAML. Okay, just a couple of words about what the tags are. Tags are used to group service together. Basically, a tag has a name that is mandatory and a set of optional attributes. For example, here we have a tag that is called data collector that has some attributes like template, ID, label, and priority. By just defining and attaching a tag to a service doesn't do anything. It doesn't add any functionality because we need a step to pre-process all the services we define in our module to be aware of those tags, for example. And we need what in Drupal and in Symfony is called a compiler pass. This is because the service container, the registry of all the services that Drupal know about, is compiled. It is not the same as compiling in a compiled language, but it's compiled. So after collecting all the services, Drupal processes the result, and a compiler pass can be used to process that set of services before they are written to the database, basically. A compiler pass must be registered to the service container to be aware of it, and to do that we need a specific class in your custom module that is a service provider. A service provider is a class in the root namespace of a module, custom or contrib or core, whatever, with a specific name, and this service provider is used by the compiling step of service container to register new services or alter the set of services discovered. The name of the class is important because must be called using the machine name of the module itself. So for example, the service provider for the web profiler module must be called web profiler service provider. If your module is like search API, for example, you have to remove all the characters and uppercase all the letters after, and core as its own core service provider. With a service provider we can register new services, maybe services that can be registered dynamically, for example only if you have some modules enabled or only in some specific condition. And you can use the register method also to register compiler passes, and then you can use alter method to remove or alter services provided by core or other modules if you want. Okay. For example, we can use a service provider, and if you look at the web profiler code, for example, we can use a service provider to register a compiler pass. Okay. If you look at the core, there is this core service provider that in the register method call this method from the container builder that it's called register for auto configuration. And this method took the name of an interface, the fully qualified namespace of an interface, in this case the event subscriber interface, and says that every class that implements this interface automatically get tagged with the event subscriber tag. Doing that, if our service, like a profiler listener, for example, implements the event subscribe interface, we no longer need to tag it, because the service container automatically knows that every class that implements that interface is an event subscriber. So you don't need this. The only point the only thing you have to do is tell Drupal that the services in your module, so in the services.yaml file of your module, have this auto configuration enabled. So you have to turn on this underscore defaults auto configure true, and automatically Drupal register your services for auto configuration. You can remove the some tag definitions. For example, in the core, event subscriber, logger aware, queue factory, and media library opener are already defined. So if your service implements one of those interfaces, you don't need to tag the service in the service container. Of course, if your module defines some and uses some tag, or if you want to automatically tag services based on a specific interface, you can implement a service provider, in the register method add this register for auto configuration for specific interfaces and specific tag. For example, the Symfony Messenger module does exactly that in the SM service provider class. Okay, this is as a limit, and because it works only at the beginning, we say that tags must have a name and can have attributes. This only works for tags that doesn't have attributes. Otherwise, you don't have any place to insert the attribute. So it works with tags like event subscriber because it doesn't have any attributes. It doesn't work, for example, with data collector tags because it has a lot of attributes to be set. Okay, so step one done. The second point is to completely remove the require of specify which arguments a service needs. So we want to go from the definition of all the arguments this profiler listener service requires to nothing, basically. Okay. To understand this, we just talk a little bit about what an alias is in the context of services. You can add one or more alias to a service ID. For example, if you open the core.services.yaml file, you see that if you are using Drupal 10.1 or newer, all services has an alias. For example, the request underscore stack service is an alias that is exactly the fully qualified class name of the class that implements that service. For example, Symfony component HTTP foundation request stack. This is because we usually in Drupal we usually define specific ID to represent services, but for Symfony point of view, a service ID is just a string with whichever character in. So the fully qualified class name is a string, so you can use it as a service ID. So the core added for all the services an alias with the same with an ID that is the same of the class name. For example, you can do, of course, this in your custom module. So, for example, this is not true because the web profiler, this is not a line for web profiler, but you can add aliases for your services too. Okay, now that all service ID in core, for example, are exactly the same as the class name, the service container of Drupal is able to automatically resolve dependency matching the type hint of the attributes of your constructor. For example, the constructor of profiler listener service has a profiler argument and a request stack argument that are the same name of the ID of the aliases, and Symfony and Drupal service container can do that, and this is called Autowiring. With this feature that we have to turn on modules by modules, this is not possible globally. So in the YAML file of your custom module, you have to add this autowire through line in the defaults part of the file. There is no need to explicitly specify which argument are required because the service container is able to find the correct implementation because the name is the same of the type hint of the argument. So you have to enable it for in every module. You can use this autowire in the defaults section of the file, or if you want only to enable autowire for specific services, you can add this autowire label not in the default section but service by service if you need. Okay. There is a problem because in Drupal, but in Symfony also, there are a lot of services that shares the same interface. For example, any logger you have defined in your custom module are instances of the logger interface from PSR. So if you have more than one concrete implementation of a specific interface, how the service container is able to understand which one to use? So for example, if I brought this configuration where I define a logger channel, DrupalCon 2025, that has channel base as parent, and then I define a service called my service that receive a logger interface as an argument, how Drupal can know which service to inject? Okay, of course it cannot do this because there are multiple implementation of this interface, and as the error said, we have to configure its value explicitly. To do that, we have two ways. One is the old way, so add the arguments in the services YAML, but we want to remove the lines. There is an attribute that is called Autowire, that you can use it on the definition of the attributes of a constructor to specify the specific ID of the specific service you want to be injected. For example, in this case, I say that the logger arguments must be an instance of logger channel DrupalCon 2025. In that way, the service container is able to inject the correct implementation, even if you are using an interface here. Another way to do that, usually when you are you cannot change the service class implementation because it's from another module or the core, for example, you can use a named argument. So in the service.yaml definition of your service, you have to say that your service requires an argument, but instead of just listing the arguments, you can say that a specific parameter in the constructor point to a specific service. Of course, this event dispatcher on the left has to match exactly the name of the parameter in the constructor. And this is useful because if you say here, we just define the specific service ID for event dispatcher, but my class has other arguments, the constructor has other arguments. You don't need to add them because the Autowiring is able to discover them automatically. You just need to say, to tell the service container which services he not able to discover automatically. Okay. Another problem is that in Drupal a controller is not a service. So all this magic Autowiring thing doesn't work automatically. For example, in Symfony it works because in Symfony controllers are services. Is another story. In Drupal we are used to define this create static function that takes the service container registry, and then we pick from the service container the service we need, and then return a new static, so a new instance of ourselves, the controller itself, with the arguments. This is a pattern that is specific for Drupal, okay, and it's an implementation of the service locator that is usually considered an anti-pattern because your controller receives all the service containers, so it's difficult to mock, difficult to test, and if we can get rid of this, our life will be easier. Starting from Drupal 10.2, controller base automatically use this new Autowire trait that magically do this for us. So if you look at the Autowire trait, he implements the create static method and uses reflection to extract the arguments, find the service that implements them, and then create the constructor with all the correct parameters. So we can remove the create method, just extend the controller base, and the Autowiring works also in this case. The controller base has this create method because it implements the container injection interface, and this is the same for the form. So if you define a form and extends from form base, it also implements container injection interface, but for some reason that I don't know, form base doesn't use this Autowire trait. So you have to do by yourselves if you want. So your specific form classes can use Autowiring, and in that case you can remove the create method because it works. Yesterday this issue was committed, to add the create support also for plugins, because plugins create method does not receive only the services required, but also configuration and some other parameters. So a new interface, a new trait need to be implemented, and starting from Drupal 11.3 in a couple of months, you can remove the create method also from plugins that extends plugin base. Okay. How this works in hooks? We know that now we can implement hooks in classes and not only on procedural function. This automatically works because all hooks you define in the hook namespace are automatically registered by Drupal as services, and automatically registered as Autowired services. So everything works without any other configuration. In the construct method of your hooks, you can inject services, and it works without any configuration. If some of the service you need are implemented multiple times, you have to add the Autowire attribute as in the service, but it works exactly the same. Okay, so we go from require all the arguments to only the ID of the service and the class where the service is. Last step, remove the ID at all. Because as we said, for Symfony and Drupal, the ID of the service is just a string. So we can use whichever string we want. And for example, we can use as the ID of the service the fully qualified class name of the service itself. You can say, okay, now that I remove the ID, how can I retrieve the service in the place of Drupal where I cannot use dependency injection, for example, in module file, or there are some, or in static files. There are some places where you cannot use dependency injection. As the ID is the name of the class, you can use /Drupal.service, the name of the class, or the shortcut that we can do in PHP. So the name of the class, column class. Okay. To remove the ID and the class definition, the only thing we have is the line with the name of the namespace and the name of the class. Here we have an alternative, because in YAML both the tilde character and the empty string represents the null value. So you can choose if you want to add the a tilde after the service definition or nothing. The column is mandatory. In my opinion, the tilde version is more readable, because the second one, it seems an error because it doesn't continue, but you can do whatever you want. It works. Okay, so we started with all the a standard definition like we are used to see in our custom module, with where we have to define an ID of the service, or we think a specific ID, and naming things is one of the other things in computer science. Then we have to add the list of the arguments. So every time our service needs a new argument, we must remember to go to the class and add the argument, then go to the service and add the argument, and so on. There are many places where this is defined, and we have to tag services with specific tag to a more shorter version, where we only must say to Drupal that a service exists, and he is able to add all the missing parts by itself. Just remember that add these defaults, underscore defaults, auto-configure and auto-wire part, otherwise it doesn't throw any error, but it doesn't work, basically. Okay, so this is all. If you want to rate the session, this is the QR code. And just an announcement before questions. We are organizing a Drupal camp in Italy in 14 November. If you want to join us, there are some stickers on the table. Some talk will be in Italian, some others will be in English, so in Rome. So if you want to join us, you are welcome, and thank you. We have time for questions, so if you want to ask one, there are a mic. If you want to talk with me later, I'm here.
Thank you for the presentation. So, through time with Drupal 9 and 10 and 11, we've been going through different versions of the dependency injection container in Drupal and different versions of Symfony, what we can do and what we can't do. So we end up, at least if you have a lot of custom code, with a lot of different services defined and written through time. And is there a Rector plugin or something that can help us clean up older implementation of services, or reporting software that can indicate where we can optimize our services definition files? Thank you.
Okay, this is a good question, but I don't have an answer. I don't know if a Rector plugin exists. I think it cannot be too difficult to implement. The only part is where you are using services that are implementation of a single interface with multiple services. So you have to understand which one you need. But maybe we can check. I don't know if Rector. All this stuff is completely backward compatible. So all the services definition you have now, written for Drupal 9 or Drupal 8, still works on Drupal 11. But yes, I don't know if a Rector plugin exists.
Thank you.
So usually when you write a service, it's best practice to use the interface when you write a constructor, right? And you're injecting the services. And you showed that the service IDs are with the fully qualified class name. And
yeah.
I didn't really understand the connection. If you define your service with the interfaces in a constructor, how do you discover the specific service?
Correct. For all the services from core, so in the core.services.yaml, they aliased all the service ID with the interface of that services, so you can continue to use interface and everything works. In your custom code, for example, if you define, in that case profiler list doesn't have an interface, but if you define a service like this, and you want in your constructor to use the interface of this service, you must need an alias from the interface to a specific implementation of your service.
Hi, a follow-up question there, I think. If I have a service with an interface and it's one-to-one, there is only one interface for one service, I assume then I can have the interface as an argument and it does not have to specify anything else. Is that correct?
In Symfony, yes. In Drupal, no.
In Drupal, no. Okay.
In Symfony, it works. If you have only one implementation of an interface, you can use the interface, and Symfony automatically adds the alias from the interface to the single implementation of the interface itself. In Drupal, this doesn't work because all the stuff, compiler pass and so on, in Drupal is a reimplementation of the one from Symfony. Basically because the service container of Symfony is built and then dumped to a file and committed, because Symfony is a static application that you cannot install or remove modules on production. You cannot do in Drupal, but you should not do Drupal in Drupal, but you can. The service container of Drupal is dumped in the database. So we have to re-implement some from this process, and it's not exactly the same. So some things you can do with Symfony, you cannot do with Drupal, unfortunately, at the moment.
Just a quick follow-up on that.
Can you use please the mic, because
Just a quick follow-up on that, because I find it very confusing reading the documentation, the official Drupal documentation on this dependency injection container, and it says something, and then it says, "Oh, go and read Symfony documentation," and then I'm by the end confused. What can I do and what can I not do?
yes.
So,
Yes, it's correct, because we haven't implemented anything from Symfony. For example, there are a couple of issues. Some of the advanced features from the service container that you can use in Symfony in Drupal are available since some month ago. For example, all these abstract services argument, services iterator. There are a lot of things that in Symfony is available, but in the steps that compile the service container to our database implementations is not available. This is an issue. Yeah. If someone wants to contribute to the Drupal documentation to improve it.
I have a question there. If you go back to the slide you had, where alias name.
Okay. Too many slides. This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't want to have a separate alias row, you could instead take the first line kind of from this, instead of saying webprofiler.profiler_listener, you can define the interface name there and then have this class underneath with your implementation.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So you can use the name of the interface as the name of the service, and then the class definition to point to the specific class.
I have a question too.
Okay.
If I understand well, if I want to use an interface, but two class implemented, so I have a conflict to deal with. So I have, as you say, I have to point on the specific class. But what if at this point I have only one class for this interface, so it works, but later I add another module which implements this interface, so just adding a module will break something in my website. I have to deal with this conflict after adding a module that implements the same interface than
Okay.
elsewhere.
Yeah.
To deal with that.
Yes, because at that point you have two implementation of the same interface. Yes, probably in the second module you have to define which one to use using the attribute.
Yeah, but that could be conflict between two modules or custom code at the point. I use only core or another module which implements interface, but I add a third module which implements itself the interface, and now I have two modules with the same, but when I wrote my code, it doesn't exist. So
Yeah.
I will break something and have to deal with this.
I don't know. This is another good question. We have to check.
Thank you.
Maybe we can try it later. Okay. So any other questions? Otherwise, I think that time is finished. Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you.